Media studies is also about appreciating the skill and creativity which goes into the production of media texts. Just as analyzing the different techniques used in the creation of a poem or novel helps you appreciate the talent of the writer, so does learning about media techniques help you value the skill with words and pictures. Gardening provides different forms of engagement for children, including designing, planting, and maintaining gardens, harvesting, preparing, and sharing food, working cooperatively in groups, learning about science and nutrition, and creating art and stories inspired by gardens. The studies summarized below have been selected because they include control groups, pre- and post measures. Imagine living in a brand new property, yet nestled amongst a mature landscape. If you are looking to downsize from your large family home, and wanting a property that offers you a lifestyle that you can lock up and leave, this townhome is unique with a private lift to take you to each level of the property without having to climb the stairs. A hybrid electric vehicle combines two sources of energy, such as a battery-powered electric motor and a conventional internal combustion engine, enabling the driver to decide which source of power is appropriate for the travel requirements of a given journey. Short jaunts to the grocery store or the post office could use the electric motor. There were a myriad of differences between Great Britain and her American colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries, but these differences can be divided into three basic categories: economic, social, and political. The original American settlers came to the colonies for varied reasons, but a common trait among these settlers was that they still considered themselves British subjects. The New England colonies didn't rely on land to make money, because they had a diverse economy, and also tobacco and other cash crops needed a specific climate to be grown in. Although no one became as wealthy as those in the South, they had a very constant economy. They didn't have to rely on one crop, instead they were able to rely on others. This assessment will show these connections are based on robust scientific evidence. The evidence is clearer than ever that the negative impacts on nature that we are pushing translate into detrimental changes in people's well-being, and that for an increasing proportion of the population on our planet, the emergency is not just an ecological emergency. Climate change would increase the frequency of powerful storms. Climate change, or global warming, is caused by burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil and gas, which release greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane into the Earth's atmosphere and oceans. That has raised the global temperature and also worsened climate and weather disasters around the world, the UN has said. Sea level rise is caused primarily by two factors related to global warming: added water from melting ice sheets and glaciers and the expansion of seawater as it warms. Within just a few decades, hundreds of thousands of homes on the US coast will be flooded. In fact, by the end of the century, 6 feet of ocean level rise would redraw the coastline of southern Florida. In the US alone, 13 million people could be forced to relocate due to rising sea levels by 2100. As a result, cities throughout the country will grapple with new populations. Effects could include more competition for jobs, increased housing prices, and more pressure on infrastructure networks. Sea level rise will affect every county in the US, including inland areas, said Dilkina. Scientists have discovered Earth's oldest asteroid strike occurred at Yarra Bubba, in outback Western Australia, and coincided with the end of a global deep freeze known as a snowball Earth. The research used isotopic analysis of minerals to calculate the precise age of the crater for the first time, putting it at 2.229 billion years old. Thousands of magnificent photographs of the northern lights, taken by hobbyists were surveyed and categorized for the book. Each auroral form is like a fingerprint, typical only of a certain phenomenon in the auroral zone. During the classification, hobbyists pointed out that a certain auroral form did not fit into any of the pre-existing categories. Every corner is now dominated by the familiar green logo, emblazoned with a white mermaid. In Chicago alone, there are 796 Starbucks. This includes a 35,000 square feet location predicted to roast nearly 200,000 pounds of coffee beans annually. The Starbucks Reserve Roastery Chicago was so highly anticipated that rewards members admittedly skipped work to attend its grand opening. While drinking coffee has been linked to all sorts of health benefits and issues, there are a few elements clouding our understanding. Again, coffee appears to affect everyone differently. Some people get headaches and restlessness from a simple cup of black coffee. Others are able to take down multiple espresso shots without noticing much of a difference. Caffeine is so effective because it peaks right away and then lingers in your system for hours. Typically, the half-life of caffeine is around 4 to 6 hours, meaning that 4 to 6 hours after consumption, about half of that caffeine is still in your system. One of the biggest knocks against coffee is the disruption it can have on healthy sleep cycles. What's even more exciting is that the 4 degrees of separation rule is that this number included people who are in rare or very specialized professions who might have a more tight-knit or smaller network. If you work in a more common profession, like teaching or medicine, the degrees of connectedness between you and everyone else is probably even less, an average of 3.2. The programmer's misunderstood world is a huge environment of variables going through processes to get a result. But that's not all. There are many ways to get there, and each programmer has their own way. Not to mention, there are a lot of programming paradigms and languages to use to design a solution. Your body needs quite a lot of energy to manufacture antibodies, so, ideally, vaccines also establish a few pathogen-specific immune cells called memory T cells and B cells that hang around long after the initial burst of antibodies has waned. If a pathogen shows up again, T and B cells spring into action, once again churning out antibodies and eliminating infected cells. Amanda Gorman has become the youngest poet in U.S. history to mark the transition of presidential power in a striking performance at the swearing-in of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Ms. Gorman offered a hopeful vision for a deeply divided country with her poem, The Hill We Climb, at the 59th inauguration ceremony. The U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration puts the number at 100 billion to 400 billion stars. According to Corey Haynes, in the February 2020 edition of Astronomy magazine, astronomers believe that, on average, stars have one planet orbiting them. That would put the number in our galaxy at about 400 billion. More than 40% of Californians aged 5 and older don't speak English at home, census data has revealed. As of July 2016, California is America's most populous state with a population of 39,250,017. At the same time, 18.6% of California residents 5 and older do not speak English very well, according to the Census Bureau. Formatting and presenting your assignment correctly is important because almost all assignments include marks for presentation. This may include marks for things such as formatting and layout, word count, APA referencing, writing style, grammar and spelling. Some lecturers assume that learners will know how to present work of the required standard or quality and don't give specific instructions. Another important step in presentation preparation is to know your audience. Your presentation plan will be completely different depending on whether audience members are novices or experts in your topic. Understanding who you're presenting to helps you select appropriate data and anecdotes to convey your topic. The mysterious specimen was studied and debated for years. It was eventually named Ichthyosaurus, or fish lizard, though we now know it was neither fish nor lizard, but a marine reptile. It lived 201 to 194 million years ago. Mary continued to unearth fossil after fossil. She sold her many finds, which increasingly fueled public interest in geology and paleontology. Australian shares are cruising on early Friday trade, but the ASX 200 is still on track to end the week on a high. Early performers on Friday include buy now, pay later company Zip, which is still rising after it announced yesterday that it's growing customer numbers and revenue. It is up 7.3%. Shoppers had to bring and pack their own bags themselves. To use a trolley required a gold coin. They didn't seek to entice customers with loyalty rewards or other gimmicks. Few Australian supermarket executives at the time would have considered them models for success. They couldn't imagine the impact Aldi would have on Australia's retail sector and shopping habits. From Monday, flights will resume to Sydney, while services will return to Melbourne from Tuesday and to Brisbane from Thursday. Passenger flights between Dubai and Perth, as well as cargo operations to all Australian points, continue as scheduled. Hundreds of Australians were last week left stranded, after the major airline announced the cancellation on Friday night. New figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show the official unemployment rate fell in December to 6.6%, as 50,000 more people became employment, after unemployment reached a peak of 7.5% in July. Unemployment remains 1.5% higher compared to December 2019. While temporary solutions, both the fancy restaurant marquees and the theatre's glasshouse display elements of functional and modular design that experts say are ripe to dominate due to the pandemic. Charles Selden is a designer at United States firm Cornerstone Architects and has been putting his mind to the future during COVID. Hydrogen is the most common element in existence. In fact, the universe is 75% hydrogen by mass, so we'll never run out of it. It's also the simplest. To make it, all you need to do is run electricity through water. That's green hydrogen, the purest source of energy in the world, and one that could replace up to 3/4 of our emissions. The disproportionate impact on younger workers, who are more likely to work in the sectors that are still not able to operate normally, hospitality, arts and recreation, is also apparent as the unemployment rate for this group is 2.3% higher than a year ago, compared to 1.5% for the whole of the labour force. Green energies need to be available at an industrial, global scale, and at a price that competes with fossil fuels. When fossil fuel energy becomes more expensive than renewable energy, that's when we'll reach the tipping point. That's when the world will begin the journey in earnest to become zero carbon. Important milestones are being missed, compromising future plans, and risking funding from organisations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Researchers fear Australia's food security will be more limited as a consequence. In the wake of the storm, the plan had been to rebuild the precinct and future-proof the research. This library of drill core samples, that would stretch 770 kilometres if placed end-to-end, and 70,000 rock samples, forms a geological map of Tasmania's mineral landscape. Crucially, it holds clues to the whereabouts of ancient mineral deposits that are essential for modern-day living. With enough user data, future AI could eventually create a fully customized partner for you in virtual reality, one that checks all your boxes. Controversially, the next step would be to experience an avatar as a physical entity. It could inhabit a lifelike android and become a combined interactive companion and sex partner. Such advanced androids don't exist yet, but they could one day. Like many people in WA's wheatbelt towns, with small populations and little light pollution, Mr. Hay is keen to capitalize on the potential of astrotourism for the local economy. But while he welcomed the policy's focus on astrotourism, he flagged potential concerns about how local governments would be able to monitor and enforce lighting conditions. Under this proposal, farmers can initiate the mediation process, whether they are in financial default or not. Under the scheme, mediation costs would be shared equally between the farmer and creditor. The push to set up a local scheme was triggered by Commissioner Kenneth Haynes 2019, in his report into the banking and financial services sector. In 2017, a record 66.6 million US residents ages 5 and older spoke a language other than English at home. The number has more than doubled since 1990, and almost tripled since 1980. As a share of the population, 21.8% of US residents speak a foreign language at home, roughly double the 11% in 1980. It says it remains committed to getting to a workable code that is fair for everyone, but argues that forcing the company to pay to show links would fundamentally break how search engines work. Introducing the proposed laws last year, Treasurer Josh Frydenberg pointed to the plummeting advertising revenues of print newspapers as evidence that publishers are losing more than they gain. Human waste is a rich source of organisms called bacteriophages, known as hunt and kill viruses for their ability to bind to bacteria and destroy them. Increasingly, the viruses are of interest to doctors concerned about antibiotic resistance, a health threat predicted to cause 10 million deaths per year by 2050. Team members did not speak to reporters, although some waved and took pictures of the media from the bus as it departed. The United States, which has accused China of hiding the extent of its initial outbreak a year ago, has called for a transparent WHO-led investigation and criticized the terms of the visit, under which Chinese experts have done the first phase of research. A team of Flinders University scientists have developed alternative proteins to consume, but instead of meat, food products like caviar, vegan patties, plant-based meats, jelly, jams and spreads have been developed from marine microalgae. The substance is usually found in the ocean, but scientists at the university have been cultivating it in labs and turning it into consumable forms. Government media has also routinely jumped on isolated studies or theories to promote the idea that the virus came to China from abroad. With far higher per capita infection rates overseas, and China's great rival, the United States, mired in a much worse pandemic, there's little reason to think other countries would have done better had the virus first emerged on their soil. Last year, a report from the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare found antibiotics were still being overprescribed and misused. That was causing dangerous bacteria to grow increasingly resistant to common medicines. The report said there was little evidence that antibiotic resistance was diminishing, and that it posed an ongoing and substantial risk to patient safety. People seeking support for mental health are facing long wait times in regional Australia, with those in southeast New South Wales having to wait up to 6 months to access a face-to-face appointment. Demand for psychologists has grown continuously during the coronavirus pandemic and since last summer's devastating bush. Parts of the paintings were covered in a thin, hard, translucent layer of calcite deposited when mineral-rich water dribbled down the rock wall. Also in the mix were trace amounts of uranium. In 2014, Professor Broom was part of a team that used a technique called uranium series dating to calculate the age of these calcite layers over a hand stencil. On one side is the seafood industry, which counts southern rock lobster, giant crab, scallops and squid as its prize exports. On the other is the oil and gas industry, which wants to use seismic testing to map the seafloor to help boost stocks for vehicles and industry. Seismic testing involves the use of air guns to release large blasts of low-frequency sound. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach has reaffirmed his commitment to holding the Tokyo Olympics this year, saying there was no plan B for the showpiece sporting event. Despite dwindling public support and a surge in coronavirus cases across the world, organizers are adamant the Tokyo Games will go ahead. The rare bombing attack hit the Bab al-Shaki commercial area in central Baghdad amid heightened political tensions over planned early elections and a severe economic crisis. Blood smeared the floors of the busy market amid piles of clothes and shoes, as survivors took stock of the disarray in the aftermath. As a result, the early rollout of the vaccine was what Biden called a dismal failure, only making it a quarter of the way to the Trump administration's goal to immunize 20 million people by the end of 2020. Only around a third of vaccines delivered to states had been administered by mid-January, with some doses expiring on the shelf.